Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready to tackle a topic that's way more complex than it seems on the surface.
I'm ready.
Today we're diving deep into laziness, but not just the I'll do the dishes later kind of laziness. We're going beyond that.
Right.
This deep dive is about exploring the surprising links between laziness, privilege, and how it all impacts society.
Interesting.
We've got some fascinating sources that dig into the causes, consequences, and even some potential solutions. Buckle up. You might be surprised by what we uncover.
Yeah, the way we often just throw around laziness as a catch-all term without really considering all the nuances is fascinating to me.
Right. It's more than just a personality quirk.
The source material we're looking at today actually defines laziness as this lack of motivation to exert effort, even for essential tasks.
Essential tasks. So it's not just about skipping the gym or procrastinating on a project.
Exactly. It suggests there's a deeper aversion to effort itself, not just a preference for relaxation.
Okay, so it's like a resistance to putting in the work, even when it's important. The source then breaks down the causes of this aversion to effort into three main categories: biological, psychological, and environmental.
Right.
From the biological perspective, what really stood out to you?
Well, one thing that I found interesting was the suggestion that genetics could actually play a role. The source suggests that some individuals might just be predisposed to lower dopamine activity, which makes it harder for them to experience that rewarding feeling of accomplishment that motivates others.
Oh, so it's like some people have to work harder just to get the same level of motivation as others? That's pretty significant.
It is.
And then there's the psychological angle. The source brings up learned helplessness, which sounds a bit disheartening.
It can be. Imagine you're in a situation where you constantly hit a wall. Let's say you're studying for a test where the material keeps changing no matter how much you prepare.
Ugh, I can relate to that feeling.
Eventually, you just might give up.
Yeah, you start to think, why bother?
Exactly. You feel like your efforts don't matter. So the source argues that this feeling of futility can lead to learned helplessness, which can then manifest as laziness.
So it's not necessarily a character flaw. It could be a learned response to difficult situations.
Exactly.
Wow, that really makes you rethink those times you felt stuck or unmotivated.
Yeah.
But it's not just our brains and past experiences that influence our motivation levels, right?
Right.
There's also the environment we're in.
Yes.
The source points out this interesting paradox. Both too little structure and too much comfort can actually contribute to laziness. How does that work?
Well, the source describes it as a kind of Goldilocks zone of motivation. If you don't have any clear goals or expectations, it's easy to drift and procrastinate. But on the flip side, if you have everything handed to you on a silver platter, you never really develop the drive to push yourself.
It's like if there's no challenge, there's no motivation.
Precisely. If you never have to work for anything, why bother, right?
That's a really good point. And this leads us to the next part of the discussion, which is where things get even more thought-provoking. The source dives into the connection between laziness and privilege.
Yeah.
And it's not about blaming anyone, but it does raise some questions about how privilege might sometimes exacerbate those tendencies toward laziness.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
The source acknowledges that this is a sensitive topic and emphasizes that not all wealthy people are lazy or entitled, but it does make this interesting point about how certain environments can foster a sense of entitlement, which can then contribute to what we perceive as laziness.
So it's not about being rich. It's about the mindset that can sometimes develop in privileged environments.
Exactly. If individuals are constantly shielded from the natural consequences of their actions, if they always get bailed out or rescued from their mistakes,
They might start to develop an expectation of success without having to put in the effort.
right. The source gives examples like expecting praise without doing the work, or believing you're exempt from rules that apply to everyone else. This sense of entitlement can then hinder personal growth.
It can create a disconnect between effort and reward.
Yes, and contribute to what we often label as laziness.
So we've got this complex interplay of biological, psychological, and environmental factors that contribute to laziness. And privilege can sometimes make things even more complicated. But here's the thing. This isn't just a personal problem.
Right.
The source makes it clear that laziness can have a much wider impact, affecting society as a whole. It's not just about one person's choices.
Exactly. Laziness has ripple effects that extend far beyond the individual. There are consequences for the person, of course, but also for society as a whole.
Let's break that down a bit, starting with the personal level. What kind of impact are we talking about? What are some of the things that our listeners might actually experience in their own lives if they're struggling with laziness?
Well, think about it. If you're constantly avoiding responsibility or not putting in the effort, it's going to show up in different areas of your life. The force highlights things like missed opportunities, strained relationships due to unmet expectations.
So it can actually impact your relationships with others.
Yes, and even potential financial difficulties if you're not managing things like your budget or career effectively. It's like this domino effect where one area starts to impact another.
Yeah, it's not just about feeling sluggish or unproductive. It can have real consequences for your overall well-being and your relationships.
Right.
But then there's the societal impact. The source makes a really strong argument that this goes way beyond just one person's choices.
Yeah.
How does laziness or a culture that tolerates or even encourages laziness affect society as a whole?
Well, one of the arguments the source makes is that if a large portion of the population isn't working to their full potential, it can lead to economic stagnation.
Because the whole system slows down.
Right. You see less innovation, less progress. There's also the burden on social systems. If people can't support themselves because they're not putting in the effort, they might become more reliant on social safety nets, which can strain those resources.
That's a really sobering thought.
It is.
So we've got this issue with both individual and societal consequences. But is there any hope? Can we actually create a world with less laziness?
The source is actually pretty optimistic. It acknowledges that completely eliminating laziness might be impossible, but it does offer some solutions for minimizing its negative effects and promoting a more equitable and productive society. It outlines 4 key strategies to consider.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are these strategies? Give me the rundown.
The source points to personal responsibility, fair consequences, education and awareness, and support systems. Each of these tackles the issue from a different angle.
All right, let's start with personal responsibility. What does that look like in action?
It's about encouraging individuals to own their choices and actions. It's a shift away from blame and towards understanding that we actually have the power to change our behavior.
It's empowering. It's
Yeah.
about taking control rather than feeling like a victim of circumstance.
Exactly.
But the source doesn't just stop at take responsibility. It also brings up the idea of fair consequences.
I'm curious, how does the source suggest we balance that need for accountability with compassion when we're addressing laziness?
That's a really important point. It's not about being punitive or creating a culture of shame. The source argues that shielding people from the natural consequences of their actions, whether that's failing a class, losing a job, or even damaging a relationship, can actually prevent them from learning and growing.
So sometimes experiencing those consequences can be a much-needed wake-up call.
Exactly, and it gives them an opportunity to learn from their mistakes.
But how do we make sure those consequences are actually fair and helpful rather than just punitive? Well, the source gives a really good example. Let's say you have a friend who's constantly asking you for favors but never reciprocates.
Oh, I think we all know someone like that.
A fair consequence, according to the source, might be setting boundaries and explaining that you value the friendship, but it needs to be a two-way street. It's not about punishing them, it's about creating a healthy balance and making sure everyone's efforts are valued.
I like that. It's about clarity and mutual respect, not about making someone feel bad. So we've got personal responsibility and consequences, but the source also really emphasizes education and awareness. Why are those elements so important in tackling this issue of laziness?
The source makes the point that sometimes what we perceive as laziness is actually a lack of understanding.
Okay, so it's not always a conscious choice. It could be a lack of knowledge or awareness.
Right. For example, educating people about the biological, psychological, and environmental factors that contribute to laziness can help them understand their own behaviors and develop more effective strategies for overcoming those challenges.
So it's about giving them the tools and information they need to make those changes.
Exactly. And then there's the awareness piece. Raising awareness about the broader societal consequences of laziness, how it impacts everyone, not just the individual.
That could be a powerful motivator for change.
It could. When people see that their actions have ripple effects, that they're part of a larger ecosystem, they might be more inclined to step up and contribute positively.
It's about that sense of connection and responsibility to the community. Okay, so we've got education and awareness, but even with all the knowledge in the world, sometimes people need more than just information, right?
Right.
They need tangible support to
Right.
make lasting changes.
Yes, and that's where support systems come in. Sometimes people need more than just knowledge. They need actual help to make those changes.
So what are we talking about here? What kind of support are we talking about?
It can take many forms. It could be something as simple as a supportive network of friends and family who offer encouragement and accountability. Or it could involve more formal support structures.
Okay, so give me some examples of those more formal structures.
Sure, the source mentions things like therapy to address any underlying psychological issues, job training programs to develop new skills, or even just access to things like reliable transportation and childcare, which can be huge barriers for some people.
You're right, those practical considerations can make a world of difference.
They can.
It's about recognizing that we all need a helping hand sometimes. It's about compassion and understanding rather than judgment.
I agree.
Okay, so we've talked about those 4 key strategies: personal responsibility, fair consequences, education and awareness, and support systems. But to really see how these ideas play out in the real world, I think it's helpful to look at some concrete examples.
Absolutely.
The course does a great job of providing some real-world scenarios that really bring these concepts to life.
Yes, it does.
Tell me more about these scenarios. What kind of situations does the source highlight?
Well, the source dives into 3 specific scenarios: the trust fund baby syndrome, the absentee owner, and the philanthropic disaster.
Okay, so these are all situations where privilege and laziness intersect.
Exactly. Each scenario illustrates how laziness, when amplified by privilege, can have real and sometimes pretty devastating consequences.
This is getting juicy. I love a good real-world example. Let's unpack these scenarios one by one.
Okay.
First up, the trust fund baby syndrome. Paint me a picture. What's the story here?
Imagine a young adult who inherits a massive trust fund, but they've never had to work a day in their lives.
Okay, the classic spoiled rich kid.
In a way, yes. They have no real understanding of financial responsibility or the value of hard work. They've always had everything handed to them.
And they haven't had to face the consequences of their own choices.
Exactly.
Oh, I think we've all seen this character in movies and TV shows. The stereotypical rich kid who blows through their inheritance on fast cars and bad investments. But I imagine the reality is a lot less glamorous.
Oh, absolutely. While it might seem entertaining on screen, in real life, it can be much more tragic. Not only does this individual risk squandering their own financial security, but their actions, or lack thereof, can have a ripple effect, impacting those around them.
So it's not just about them failing to live up to their own potential. It's about the harm they can inflict on others through their irresponsibility.
Right. For example, the source asks us to imagine the employees of a family business who lose their jobs because the heir isn't competent enough to manage it.
Oh, wow.
Or what about the beneficiaries of a charitable trust who are deprived of much-needed support because the funds have been mismanaged?
That really puts things into perspective.
Yeah.
It's a stark reminder that personal responsibility isn't just about taking care of yourself. It's about recognizing the impact your choices have on those around you. Okay, let's move on to the next scenario.
Yeah.
The absentee owner.
Okay.
What's that all about?
So in this scenario, someone inherits a family business, but they have absolutely no interest in actually running it.
They're not passionate about it.
Not at all. Maybe they lack the skills, the motivation, or just the basic willingness to put in the effort.
So they just phone it in.
Pretty much. They might delegate everything to managers and employees, remaining physically present but mentally checked out.
They're basically a figurehead, reaping the benefits without actually contributing anything meaningful. What kind of impact does this have on the business and the people who work there?
Well, you can imagine this lack of engagement from the top can lead to all sorts of problems. The business might stagnate, lose its competitive edge, and eventually fail.
And who pays the price for that failure?
It's rarely the absentee owner who's comfortably living off their inheritance. The source points out that it's often the employees who suffer the most. They could lose their jobs, their livelihoods, their sense of security, all because someone else wasn't willing to step up and do the work.
It's a harsh reminder that even when you're cushioned by wealth, your lack of effort can still have a devastating impact on the lives of others. Okay, let's move on to the final scenario. The philanthropic disaster. This one sounds particularly intriguing. Set the scene for me.
Imagine someone inherits a charitable foundation, a powerful tool for positive change. However, instead of using their wealth and influence to make a real difference, they completely mismanage the foundation, driven by a combination of laziness, incompetence, or maybe even misguided intentions.
So it's like even good intentions can go awry if they're not paired with effort and competence.
Exactly. The source describes a scenario with unqualified board members, poorly chosen projects, and mismanaged funds, and what's the result?
Worthy causes don't get the support they need.
Right. The opportunity to make a real difference is just wasted.
It's a missed opportunity on a massive scale. It makes you wonder how much good could be accomplished if those in positions of privilege use their resources responsibly and put in the effort to make a real difference.
It's a great question. And it's important to remember that not all wealthy or privileged individuals are like this.
Right, these are just examples to illustrate a point.
The source is very clear that there are countless people who use their privilege to make positive contributions to society.
That's an important point to emphasize. It's not about demonizing wealth or privilege. It's about recognizing how these factors can sometimes amplify the negative consequences of laziness. And it's a reminder that regardless of our circumstances, we all have a responsibility to make choices that benefit both ourselves and the world around us.
I agree.
Welcome back, everyone. In the last part, we explored some real-world examples of how laziness, especially when mixed with privilege, can have a big impact. But let's shift gears now and talk about solutions.
Sounds good.
The source we're examining offers some really interesting strategies for creating a world that's both fairer and more productive. Where should we start?
Well, the source outlines 4 key strategies for tackling this issue.
Okay, hit me with them.
It suggests focusing on personal responsibility, fair consequences, education and awareness, and support systems.
I like that. Each one seems to address the problem from a different angle. Let's start with personal responsibility. It's a term we hear all the time, but what does it actually mean when we're talking about laziness? How do we encourage that sense of ownership in a world that often seems to reward shortcuts?
You're right, it's easy to get caught up in that instant gratification mindset. The source defines personal responsibility as recognizing that our choices have consequences, and we're accountable for the direction of our own lives. It's about moving away from blame and really stepping into that power we have to shape our own destinies.
I love that, owning our power.
Yeah.
But how do we actually cultivate that sense of personal responsibility, both in ourselves and in others? Sometimes it feels like such an abstract concept.
Yeah, I get that. The source offers some practical ways to make it more tangible.
Okay, I'm all about practical.
Setting clear goals and intentions can provide that roadmap. It gives you something to work towards and can really boost your motivation. And being brutally honest with yourself about your strengths and weaknesses can help you identify areas where you need to grow.
I'm a huge fan of self-reflection. It's amazing what you can uncover when you really take the time to examine your own thoughts and behaviors.
Exactly. And then I think maybe the most crucial piece is holding ourselves accountable for our actions.
That's going to be tough.
It can be. But acknowledging our mistakes, learning from those missteps, that's where real growth happens.
So true. It's not about being perfect. It's about learning and evolving. Speaking of learning, that brings us to our next strategy, fair consequences. This one seems tricky. How do we make sure consequences are actually fair and help people learn rather than just punishing them?
It's a delicate balance, right? We don't want to shield people from the natural consequences of their actions because that can prevent them from learning those valuable lessons.
It's like they never get the opportunity to course correct.
Right. But we also don't want to create a system that's overly punitive or doesn't allow for second chances.
It's about finding that sweet spot where the consequences are meaningful but also restorative.
Exactly. And the source uses this really helpful example. Imagine a student fails a test because they didn't study.
Classic scenario.
Instead of just letting them retake the test, the source suggests maybe requiring them to complete extra credit assignments or attend some tutoring sessions. That way, they see that their actions have consequences, but they also get the support they need to do better next time.
So it's not just punishment, it's about learning and growth. I like that. But knowledge is power, right?
Absolutely.
And that's where education and awareness come into play. The source seems to really emphasize the importance of understanding the why behind laziness.
It does, because sometimes what we perceive as laziness might actually be something else entirely. Maybe it's a lack of understanding, a lack of resources, or maybe even a symptom of a deeper issue.
That's a really good point. It's not always a conscious choice.
Right. And educating people about those underlying factors, whether they're biological, psychological, or environmental, could be incredibly empowering.
Yeah, it's like giving people the tools to understand their own behavior and make those positive changes.
Exactly. And then there's the awareness piece, understanding the ripple effect of our actions.
How our individual choices can impact the community as a whole.
Exactly. When people understand that we're all in this together, it might motivate them to step up and be more active, more engaged members of society.
I love that. But even with all the knowledge and self-awareness in the world, there are times when people just need a little extra help. The source talks about the importance of support systems. What does that look like in practice?
It can be as simple as having a strong network of friends and family who offer encouragement and accountability.
Having people in your corner cheering you on.
Exactly. But sometimes you need more than that. The source also talks about more formal support structures.
So things like therapy or job training programs.
Yes, and even just having access to basic things like reliable transportation or affordable childcare, which can be huge barriers for some.
Those are such good points. It's about recognizing that sometimes those laziness behaviors are actually symptoms of larger systemic issues.
Exactly.
And creating a society where people can thrive means addressing those underlying issues. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. Personal responsibility, fair consequences, education, awareness, and support systems. But I think it's time we get down to brass tacks.
Let's do it.
What are some specific, actionable strategies that our listeners can start using today to break free from those patterns of laziness and build a more motivated and fulfilling life?
One of the most effective strategies, according to the source, is breaking down large tasks into smaller, more manageable steps.
Well, the classic, how do you eat an elephant?
Exactly, one bite at a time.
I love it.
It prevents us from feeling overwhelmed and helps build momentum.
And it makes those big, daunting goals seem a lot less intimidating. What else?
The source also suggests setting realistic deadlines for each of those smaller steps. A little bit of external pressure can go a long way.
I'm all about deadlines. It's amazing how much more productive I am when I have that external accountability. But I also think it's important to celebrate those small wins along the way, Don't forget to acknowledge those mini victories.
I agree. Celebrating progress, no matter how small, reinforces those positive behaviors and keeps you motivated.
It's all about that positive feedback loop. Another strategy that I personally swear by is identifying your peak productivity times.
Oh, good point. We don't all operate on the same schedule.
Right. Some people are at their best first thing in the morning. Others hit their stride in the afternoon or even late at night. Figure out what works best for you and try to schedule your most challenging tasks for those peak times.
Makes sense. Working with your natural energy cycles rather than against them. But even when you've got that ideal schedule figured out, we can't forget about distractions.
Oh man, the distraction.
It's a constant battle.
It really is, especially in today's hyper-connected world.
It feels like there's always something vying for our attention.
Always. So how do we fight back? How do we reclaim our focus?
The source suggests a few things. Creating a dedicated workspace, silencing those notifications, using website blockers to limit access to those time-sucking websites.
I've started putting my phone on Do Not Disturb when I'm working, and it's been life-changing. It's amazing how much more I can get done when I'm not constantly interrupting myself to check email or scroll through social media.
I hear that. It's all about creating boundaries and protecting your time and attention. And sometimes, the best thing you can do is step away from the digital world altogether.
Oh yeah, get out in nature.
Exactly. Taking a walk, exercising, even just meditating for a few minutes, it can do wonders for your mental clarity and focus.
Agreed. Sometimes a digital detox is exactly what we need to reset and come back to our work with renewed energy. But I think there's another crucial element we need to address when we're talking about overcoming laziness, and that's mindset.
Oh, absolutely. Our thoughts and beliefs shape our reality.
They really do. So if we're constantly telling ourselves, I'm lazy, I can't do this, or I'll never be successful.
You're basically setting yourself up for failure.
Exactly. Those thoughts become self-fulfilling prophecies. So how do we rewrite those negative scripts? How do we shift from I can't to I can? How do we cultivate a more positive, growth-oriented mindset?
One technique the source highlights is practicing gratitude.
Okay, tell me more about that.
When we intentionally focus on what we're grateful for, it shifts our attention away from lack and towards abundance, and that can be a powerful motivator.
It's like changing the channel in your mind, tuning into a more positive frequency.
I like that. And when we feel grateful, when we appreciate what we have, we're more likely to take care of it.
It's like we're more motivated to nurture those things, to invest our time and energy in what matters most. What else can we do to cultivate a more empowering mindset?
Surround yourself with positive and supportive people.
Yes, your tribe matters.
It does. Their energy can be contagious. And when you're around people who believe in you, who challenge you to grow, it can make a world of difference.
It's like having a personal cheerleading squad. Okay, we've talked about mindset, we've talked about practical strategies, and we've talked about surrounding yourself with the right people. But there's one more piece of the puzzle, one more ingredient that we need to address: purpose.
So true. You can have all the tools and the right mindset, but without a sense of purpose, it's easy to lose steam.
It's like you're going through the motions without that deeper motivation. Why does the source place so much emphasis on purpose?
Well, it argues that purpose is that fuel, that driving force that sustains motivation over the long haul. When you know why you're doing what you're doing, it gives meaning and direction to your efforts.
It's like having that compass that helps you stay on course, even when things get tough. But figuring out your purpose, man, that can feel really daunting. It's such a big, almost abstract concept. Where do you even start?
The source says finding your purpose isn't about some big aha moment, like a lightning bolt striking you out of the blue.
Right, it's not that dramatic.
It's about self-discovery, a process of exploration and experimentation.
So it's not so much about finding it as it is about cultivating it, growing into it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's about paying attention to those things that light you up.
What makes you feel alive?
Exactly. What gets you excited, what makes you want to jump out of bed in the morning, and then figure out how to channel that energy into something meaningful, something that makes a difference in the world.
It's like finding that sweet spot where your passions align with a greater purpose, a purpose that resonates with your soul.
Yeah.
I love that. But let's be real for a second. Even with a strong sense of purpose, we all have those days when we struggle. We all have those moments of self-doubt and discouragement.
Oh, absolutely. We're human, after all.
What does the source suggest we do to navigate those inevitable dips in motivation?
Self-compassion. The source emphasizes that self-compassion is essential for creating lasting change.
I love that.
It's about treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding that we would offer a friend who is struggling.
It's so much easier to be kind to others than it is to be kind to ourselves. We can be our own worst critics, beating ourselves up for every little mistake.
We are. Self-compassion is about recognizing that we're all human, we all make mistakes, and we're worthy of love and acceptance even when we fall short.
It's about giving ourselves permission to be perfectly imperfect.
Well said. And when we cultivate that self-compassion, it creates a safe and supportive inner environment, a space where we can truly grow and thrive.
I love that imagery. A safe and supportive inner environment. It's like building a foundation of self-love that can withstand any storm.
Exactly. And when we cultivate that inner strength and resilience, it becomes so much easier to face challenges and achieve those goals, not because we're driven by fear or self-criticism, but because we're fueled by a genuine desire to grow, learn, and make a positive impact on the world.
I'm really resonating with this idea of self-compassion as a foundation for growth. It's about approaching ourselves with that same kindness and understanding that we offer to others. But we've been focusing a lot on individual responsibility and self-improvement. What about the role of community?
Oh, that's a great point. We've been talking a lot about what individuals can do, but we can't forget that we're all part of this larger ecosystem. Community plays such a vital role in supporting and challenging us to become our best selves.
It's like we're not meant to go it alone on this journey. We need each other. We thrive when we're connected to others.
Exactly. Community can provide a sense of belonging, purpose, even inspiration.
And practical support.
Absolutely. Encouragement, a safe space to share struggles and celebrate successes, it's all part of it.
I know I personally feel so much more motivated when I'm part of a community, whether it's a group of friends, a professional network, or even just an online community of like-minded people. It's like having a built-in support system that helps you stay on track and remind you that you're not alone.
It makes a world of difference. The source highlights how powerful those shared experiences, that collective wisdom and encouragement can be, both for individual growth and for creating positive change in the world.
This deep dive has been so enlightening. We've explored so many layers of this seemingly simple concept of laziness, from the science behind it, to the ripple effects it can have on society, to those really practical strategies for overcoming it.
It's been great.
But before we wrap up this episode, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. We've talked a lot about how laziness is influenced by all these different factors, biological, psychological, environmental. So how does that affect our understanding of personal responsibility? How do we balance those external factors with the fact that we still have choices to make? It's a tough question, right? Where do we draw the line?
It is. We want to empower people to take ownership of their lives, but it's crucial to acknowledge that not everyone starts from the same place.
Not everyone has the same opportunities, the same advantages.
Exactly. Some people face much greater obstacles.
So how do we reconcile that? How do we hold individuals accountable for their actions while also recognizing the role that those external factors play in shaping their choices?
It's about striking that balance between accountability and compassion.
I like that.
We can't just ignore those external factors or pretend they don't matter.
Right. We can't just say, well, you should have tried harder or you should have made better choices without acknowledging the context.
Exactly. Sometimes what appears to be laziness on the surface might actually be a symptom of deeper struggles.
So it could be a manifestation of poverty, trauma, mental health challenges.
It could, and we need to be sensitive to that. But it's also not about making excuses for harmful behavior.
Right. It's not about letting people off the hook.
It's about recognizing that the path to personal responsibility might look different for each individual.
It's about meeting people where they are.
Exactly. For some individuals, taking personal responsibility might mean seeking therapy to address past trauma that's contributing to their lack of motivation.
So it's about giving them the tools and support they need to heal and move forward.
Yes, and for others, it might involve accessing educational resources or job training programs to help them develop the skills and confidence they need to succeed.
It's about empowering people, giving them the resources to create a better life for themselves.
And ultimately, it's about creating a society that doesn't just preach personal responsibility, but actively creates opportunities for everyone to achieve it, regardless of their background.
Wow. This deep dive has been incredible. We've covered so much ground. We've explored the science behind laziness, the impact it can have on both individuals and society, and the complex relationship between privilege and personal responsibility.
We have.
And most importantly, we've discussed some really practical, actionable strategies for overcoming those patterns of laziness and living a more motivated and fulfilling life.
It's been a fascinating conversation.
It has, and I hope it encourages all of our listeners to keep thinking critically, keep asking those tough questions, and keep challenging those assumptions about laziness and personal responsibility.
I hope so too. It's an ongoing conversation.
It is. And that's what we're all about here on the Deep Dive, right?
Yeah.
Pushing past those surface level explanations and really diving deep into the complexities of the human experience.
Absolutely.
We want to give you, our amazing listeners, the knowledge and tools to navigate the world with more awareness, more empathy, and a passion for making a positive impact. So keep those questions coming, keep those minds open, and keep diving deep.
This is DigitView.